The clock on my nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. when I heard Sophie's car pull into our driveway. Again. Third time this week, she'd come home past midnight, claiming another emergency strategy session at the office. I'm Ethan McAllister, and after 15 years of marriage, I know the difference between corporate dedication and something else entirely. I stayed still, pretending to sleep, listening to her careful footsteps on the creaky stairs of our old colonial house. Sophie always complained about those stairs, said they made the place feel ancient and embarrassing. I loved them. They were honest. They announced every movement, every secret return. The bedroom door whispered open. Through half-closed eyes, I watched my wife of 15 years slip out of her coat. Even in the darkness, I caught it, that smell. Not her usual perfume, something heavier, masculine, expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "Working late again?" I mumbled, playing the sleepy husband. Sophie froze for just a second. "You know how it is, honey. Carter's really pushing this quarterly review. Big presentation tomorrow." Carter Voss, her boss, the Golden Boy CEO who drove a BMW and wore suits that probably cost more than I made in a month as a construction foreman. I'd met him exactly twice at company parties, and both times he'd looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. "Must be some presentation," I said, rolling over to face her. "Third late night this week." "It's complicated, Ethan. You wouldn't understand the corporate world." There it was, that tone, the one that reminded me I was just a guy who built things with his hands while she climbed the ladder in her fancy HR department. 15 years ago, she'd loved that I was different from the office types. Now it felt like my biggest failing. I watched her disappear into our bathroom. The water ran for a long time, longer than usual. When she finally slipped into bed, she stayed on her side, back turned to me. The cologne smell lingered. Sleep didn't come easy after that. I lay there thinking about changes I'd been ignoring. The new clothes she'd been buying. The way she'd started working out again after years of saying she was too busy. The phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. Morning came gray and drizzling, typical for coastal Maine in October. Sophie was already dressed when I stumbled downstairs, looking perfect as always in her tailored suit and heels. She barely looked up from her coffee. "Don't forget," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "My birthday party is tomorrow night. You did remember to invite people, right?" Of course. I had remembered. In fact, I'd been planning something special. Should be a good turnout. Even invited some folks from your office. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She paused, lipstick halfway to her mouth. "My office?" "Sure. Carter said he'd love to come when I ran into him at the hardware store last week." That was a lie, but I wanted to see her reaction. The lipstick slipped slightly. "You talked to Carter?" "Nice guy. Very friendly. Said he's been working closely with you on some big projects." Sophie's reflection in the mirror looked pale. "Yes, well, he's very dedicated to the company." After she left, I found myself standing in our kitchen, holding her coffee mug. A simple thing, really. White ceramic, with a chip on the handle that she'd always meant to replace. But today, it felt like evidence of something ending. My phone buzzed. Text from my old friend Frankie, who ran The Anchor, the local dive bar where I spent most Friday nights. "Mac, you free for a beer later? Got something to tell you." Frankie was an ex-cop who'd retired early after taking a bullet in the leg during a domestic dispute. He had a nose for trouble and a mouth that usually stayed shut unless something was seriously wrong. If he wanted to talk, I needed to listen. I spent the day at the construction site, but my mind kept wandering. We were renovating an old Victorian downtown, turning it into condos for wealthy summer people. Honest work, but lately it felt like I was just making pretty spaces for people who looked down on folks like me. "You're distracted today, boss," said Jimmy, my best carpenter. Everything okay at home? Just tired, I lied, hammering a nail with more force than necessary. But Jimmy was right. I was distracted. 15 years of marriage doesn't just evaporate overnight, but it can certainly develop cracks. Like the foundation of an old house, you don't always notice the damage until something shifts. That evening, I walked into the Anchor to find Frankie polishing glasses behind the bar. The place smelled like beer and fried fish, with lobster traps hanging from the ceiling and old maritime photos covering the walls. It was the kind of authentic Maine bar that tourists love to discover and locals use to escape their problems. Mac, Frankie nodded toward my usual stool. Beer? Make it 2. Sounds like I'm gonna need them. He poured 2 Allagash whites and slid one across the scarred wooden bar. You know I don't like getting involved in people's personal business. But I've known you since high school, and I've seen this story before. He leaned against the bar, lowering his voice. That fancy boss of Sophie's has been asking questions around town, about you. My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think he's looking for dirt. Asked old Pete at the gas station about your drinking habits. Asked Maria at the grocery store if you and Sophie ever fight in public. Real subtle-like, but not subtle enough. I took a long pull of beer, thinking. How long has this been going on? Couple weeks maybe, but Mac, there's more. Frankie glanced around the nearly empty bar. My cousin works security at that fancy hotel up the coast. Says she's seen Sophie there, with him, during lunch hours. The beer suddenly tasted like copper in my mouth. You sure? Sure enough to risk our friendship telling you about it. I sat there for a long time, watching condensation drip down my beer bottle. Outside, fog was rolling in from the ocean, wrapping around the streetlights like ghostly fingers. This was my town, my life, my marriage, and apparently, it was all built on lies. Frankie, I need a favor. Name it. Sophie's birthday party is tomorrow night at our house. I want you to come. He raised an eyebrow. Not really my scene, Mac. It will be tomorrow night, trust me. I drove home through the fog, my mind racing. The pieces were falling into place now, the late nights, the cologne, the new clothes, and now Carter asking questions around town. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning something bigger. Sophie was already asleep when I got home, or pretending to be. I stood in our bedroom doorway, looking at the woman I'd loved for 15 years. In the dim light from the hallway, she looked like a stranger. I went down to the basement and found my old toolbox. Hidden in the bottom, wrapped in an oily rag, was a small digital recorder I'd used for work meetings. Battery was flat, but it would charge overnight. Tomorrow was Sophie's birthday, time to give her a party she'd never forget. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes Maine postcards. Sophie was up early, fussing over party preparations with an energy I hadn't seen in months. She'd hired caterers, rented extra chairs, even bought new curtains for the living room. This is important, Ethan, she said, arranging flowers in our front hallway. Carter and some other executives are coming. I need everything to be perfect. Don't worry, I said, checking the small recorder in my pocket. I've got some surprises planned. The first guests arrived around 6. Our house filled with the usual crowd, neighbors, a few guys from my crew, Sophie's office friends. I played the perfect host, mixing drinks and making small talk, but my eyes kept tracking the door. Carter arrived fashionably late, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine in his cashmere sweater and expensive jeans. He brought Sophie an enormous bouquet of orchids, the kind that cost more than most people spent on groceries. Sophie, darling, he said, kissing her cheek just a bit too long. You look absolutely stunning. I watched from across the room as she blushed. Actually blushed. When was the last time I'd made my wife blush? Carter, you remember my husband, Ethan, Sophie said, her voice tight. Of course. Carter extended a hand with all the warmth of a business transaction. Nice to see you again, Ethan. Sophie tells me you're in construction. I build things, I said, gripping his hand just hard enough to make him wince. Fix things that are broken. Very satisfying work. Something flickered in his eyes. Fear? Guilt? Hard to tell with guys like him. They're trained to hide their real feelings behind corporate smiles. The party flowed around us, conversations mixing with laughter and clinking glasses. I kept one eye on Sophie and Carter, noting how they moved around each other like dancers who'd rehearsed their steps. Never too close in public, but always aware of where the other was standing. Around 8 o'clock, I made my move. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, tapping a knife against my beer bottle. "If I could have your attention for a moment." The room quieted. Sophie looked nervous. Carter looked annoyed. Perfect. 15 years ago, I married the most beautiful woman in town, I began, raising my bottle toward Sophie. She was smart, ambitious, and way out of my league. Still is, according to some people. A few chuckles from the crowd. Sophie's smile looked painted on. "Marriage isn't easy," I continued. "Takes trust, honesty, commitment. Sometimes people grow apart, want different things. Sometimes they find what they're looking for in unexpected places." Even the caterers had stopped moving. "But tonight's about celebration. So here's to my beautiful wife, Sophie, and to all the late nights she's been putting in at the office." I raised my bottle higher. "To dedication above and beyond the call of duty." "Cheers," someone called out weakly. "Oh, and Carter," I added, turning toward him. "Thanks for being such a hands-on boss. Sophie's told me how much personal attention you've been giving her." Carter's face went white. Sophie looked like she might faint. That's when my second surprise walked through the front door. Tessa Morrison was Carter's girlfriend of 3 years, a local real estate agent with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. I'd invited her that morning, mentioning casually that Carter would be at the party and might need a ride home. "Carter?" Tessa's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "What are you doing here?" Every head in the room swiveled between Carter, Sophie, and Tessa. It was better than dinner theater. "Tessa," Carter stammered. "I didn't expect. This is just a work function." "Funny," she said, her eyes taking in the intimate party setting, the expensive orchids, the way Sophie was standing frozen beside him. "You told me you were having dinner with clients in Portland." I stepped forward, playing the helpful host. "Actually, Tessa, Carter's been incredibly generous with his time lately. Sophie's been working late with him almost every night this week. Real dedication to the company." Tessa's eyes narrowed. She was a smart woman, had to be, to survive in real estate. The pieces were falling into place for her, just like they had for me. "Is that so?" she said quietly. The room held its breath. This was small-town Maine, where gossip was currency and everyone knew everyone else's business. What happened next would be talked about for months. Carter tried to salvage the situation. "Tessa, sweetheart, let me explain." "Don't." Her voice was ice. "Don't you dare call me sweetheart." She turned to Sophie, who was gripping the back of a chair like it was keeping her upright. "How long?" Tessa asked. Sophie opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I'll tell you how long," I said, pulling out my phone. "About 6 weeks, according to the hotel records." That was a bluff. I didn't have hotel records. But the way both Sophie and Carter flinched told me I was close to the truth. "Hotel records?" Tessa's voice rose. "What hotel records?" "The Ocean View Inn," I said, watching their faces. "Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually around lunchtime. Room 237, registered under the name Johnson." Carter made a choking sound. Sophie sat down hard in the nearest chair. "You had them followed?" someone whispered. "Didn't have to," I replied. "Amazing what people will tell you if you ask the right questions, especially when they're concerned about their neighbors. Mrs. Blanchard, our elderly neighbor, stepped forward from the corner where she'd been quietly observing. "I tried to tell you gently, dear," she said to me, "but when I saw that fancy car in your driveway 3 times last week while you were at work, well, a woman notices these things." The crowd was buzzing now, whispers and shocked murmurs filling the room. This was the kind of drama that would fuel conversations at the grocery store and post office for weeks. Tessa walked over to Carter, her heels clicking on our hardwood floor like a countdown timer. 3 years, she said quietly. 3 years I wasted on you. Then she slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed through our living room like a gunshot. "Tessa, please," Carter began. "Save it for someone who cares," she snapped. She turned to Sophie, who was still sitting in the chair, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "And you," Tessa said. "I actually felt sorry for you at the company Christmas party. Thought you seemed lonely, married to a blue-collar guy while working with all those executives. Turns out you're just a common cheat." Sophie finally found her voice. "You don't understand. I understand plenty." Tessa's voice carried across the silent room. "I understand that you're both liars. I understand that you've been making fools of everyone who trusted you. And I understand that this whole town is going to know about it by tomorrow morning." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then paused and looked back at me. "Ethan, I'm sorry. You deserved better than this." After she left, the party died quickly. Guests made awkward excuses and shuffled out, but I could see it in their eyes. They couldn't wait to get home and start making phone calls. By morning, everyone in town would know that Sophie McAllister and Carter Voss had been caught cheating at her own birthday party. When the last guest left, it was just the 3 of us, me, Sophie, and Carter, standing in our living room surrounded by empty glasses and wilted flowers. "Ethan," Sophie began, tears streaming down her face, "let me explain." "Explain what?" I asked. "Explain the hotels, the late nights, the cologne I've been smelling on your clothes?" Carter stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Look, this has gotten out of hand. We're all adults here. These things happen." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "These things happen? That's your explanation?" "What I mean is, we can handle this quietly, privately. No need for lawyers or complications." "Complications?" I repeated the word slowly. "Is that what you call destroying a 15-year marriage? A complication?" Sophie was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Ethan, please. I never meant for it to happen. It just did." "Nothing just happens, Sophie. You made choices. Every late night, every lie, every time you came home smelling like his cologne. Those were choices." Carter was looking around nervously, probably calculating damage to his reputation and career. In a small town like ours, being branded as a homewrecker could ruin a man, especially one whose business depended on trust and respectability. "What do you want?" he asked finally. I looked at him for a long moment, then at Sophie, then back at him. "I want you both to understand something," I said quietly. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Tonight was just the beginning." Sunday morning brought the aftermath. I woke up alone. Sophie had spent the night in the guest room, and I could hear her on the phone through the thin walls, her voice urgent and pleading. Damage control. Probably calling her sister or her best friend Lila from the office. My phone had been buzzing since dawn. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails from people who'd been at the party or heard about it secondhand. In a town of 8,000 people, news traveled faster than a nor'easter. The first call I returned was to Frankie. "Jesus, Mac," he said when he picked up. "I heard about last night. You okay?" "Never better," I said, and meant it. For the first time in weeks, I felt clear-headed. "You still got connections at the police department?" "Some. Why?" "Carter Voss has been asking questions around town about me. I want to know why. Give me a few hours." I spent the morning cleaning up from the party, boxing up Sophie's birthday gifts, throwing away the expensive orchids Carter had brought. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the rafters. Sophie emerged from the guest room around noon, looking haggard. She'd tried to cover the damage with makeup, but her eyes were still red and swollen. "We need to talk," she said. "No," I replied, not looking up from the dishes I was washing. "We really don't. Ethan, please, what happened last night?" What happened last night was 15 years of marriage ending in front of half the town. Pretty clear communication, if you ask me. She sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten breakfast together thousands of times, where we'd planned our future, where we'd talked about having kids someday. "I know you're angry." "Angry?" I turned to face her. "Sophie, I'm not angry. Angry would be if you'd forgotten our anniversary or spent too much money on shoes. This is something else entirely." "Then what is it?" I dried my hands on a dish towel, considering the question. "Disappointed, I guess, and maybe a little impressed." "Impressed?" "Takes real commitment to lie to someone's face for 6 weeks. Takes planning, coordination. I never gave you credit for that kind of dedication." Her face crumpled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How is it supposed to happen, Sophie? You and Carter ride off into the sunset while I just fade away quietly?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes. That's exactly what she'd been hoping for. My phone rang. "Frankie. Mac, you need to hear this. Carter's been asking questions, all right, but not just about your drinking or fighting. He wanted to know about your temper, whether you'd ever been violent, whether you owned any guns." The pieces clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. "He's building a case." "That's what it looks like. My buddy at the station says Carter called them Friday, asking hypothetical questions about restraining orders and domestic violence procedures." I looked at Sophie, who was pretending not to listen, but hanging on every word. "Thanks, Frankie. I owe you one. Mac, be careful. Guys like Carter, they don't fight fair." After I hung up, Sophie and I stared at each other across our kitchen. "Restraining orders?" I said quietly. She had the grace to look ashamed. "That was Carter's idea. He thought if things got messy..." "You were going to have me arrested? For what?" "Not arrested, just kept away, until we could figure things out." "Figure things out?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean until you could grab half of everything I've worked for and disappear with your boyfriend?" "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that." I sat down across from her. "Sophie, I've been building houses for 20 years. I know the difference between solid foundation and rotten timber. This marriage? It's been rotten for a while. I just didn't want to admit it." She was crying again, but they looked like crocodile tears now. "Ethan, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. Can't fix what was never real to begin with." My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Tessa Morrison. Can we meet? I have information you need to hear." I showed Sophie the message. Her face went pale. "What could she possibly know?" Sophie asked. "Guess I'll find out." I met Tessa at a coffee shop in the next town over, a place where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. She was waiting in a corner booth, looking like she hadn't slept much either. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "Thank you for last night. That took guts." She laughed bitterly. "Guts or stupidity? I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." We ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I went through Carter's things last night," she said. "Found some interesting documents." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of emails, text messages, and what looked like legal documents. "He's been planning this for months, Ethan. Not just the affair, the whole thing. He's been documenting everything about your marriage, looking for ways to make you look unstable. I flipped through the papers, my anger building with each page. There were emails to a private investigator asking about surveillance options, text messages to Sophie discussing exit strategies and asset protection, even a draft restraining order already filled out with my name. They were going to frame you, Tessa continued. Make it look like you were abusive, dangerous. Sophie would get the house, the savings, everything, while you'd be lucky to get supervised visitation rights if you had kids. Why are you showing me this? Because I spent 3 years with that man. I know how he operates. He destroys people who get in his way, and he's very good at making it look legal. I studied the documents more carefully. There were bank statements showing Carter had been paying for Sophie's new clothes, her gym membership, even her car payments. He'd been grooming her, making her dependent on him while building a case against me. There's more, Tessa said. Carter's company is in trouble. Big trouble. He's been using corporate funds for personal expenses, including his affair with your wife. If the board finds out, he's finished. How do you know all this? I'm a real estate agent, Ethan. I know how to read financial documents, and I know when someone's cooking the books. Carter's been living beyond his means for years. She pulled out another set of papers. These are his personal financial statements. He's leveraged to the hilt, expensive car payments, mortgage on that fancy house, credit card debt up to his eyeballs. He needs Sophie's divorce settlement to stay afloat. I sat back in the booth, processing everything. It wasn't just an affair. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to destroy my life and steal everything I'd worked for. What do you want from me? I asked. I want to help you destroy him, she said simply. He humiliated me in front of the entire town. He was planning to ruin your life, and he's been stealing from his own company. Men like Carter think they're untouchable because they wear expensive suits and know the right people. She leaned forward, her eyes hard. Let's prove them wrong. I looked at this woman I barely knew, offering to help me take down the man who'd wrecked both our lives. It was crazy, dangerous, and probably stupid. What did you have in mind? I asked. Monday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Jimmy could handle the crew for a day, and I had more important business to attend to. Sophie had left early, probably hoping to beat the gossip mill to her office. She was in for a surprise. Tessa and I met at her real estate office, a small building overlooking the harbor. She'd been busy since our coffee meeting, and the conference table was covered with documents, photographs, and what looked like a battle plan. I've been thinking about this all night, she said, pouring coffee from a thermos. Carter's weakness is his ego. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else, especially small-town people like us. How do we use that? We give him exactly what he wants, a chance to show how clever he is. But we control the game. She spread out a timeline on the table, marking key dates and events. Carter's company has a board meeting next Friday. Quarterly review, budget approvals, the works. If certain information were to surface before then, what kind of information? Tessa smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The kind that shows he's been embezzling company funds to finance his lifestyle and his affair with your wife. She showed me bank records, credit card statements, expense reports, all carefully cross-referenced and highlighted. Carter had been sloppy, using his corporate card for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, even Sophie's gym membership. How did you get all this? I told you, I spent 3 years with him. I know his passwords, his habits, his hiding places. Amazing what people leave lying around when they think they're safe. I studied the documents. It was damning evidence, but something bothered me. This feels too easy. Carter's not stupid. Why would he leave such an obvious trail? Because he never thought anyone would look. And because he's been planning to pin it all on Sophie if things went wrong. She pulled out another folder, this one containing emails between Carter and his lawyer, Miles Brennan. The subject line made my stomach turn. Employee fraud documentation. He's been setting her up from the beginning, Tessa explained. Sophie has access to the HR systems, the corporate accounts, everything. If the embezzlement comes to light, Carter has already built a case showing that she was the one with access and opportunity. And motive, I added, understanding dawning. A woman having an affair, looking to leave her husband, needing money for a new life. Exactly. Carter gets rid of a potential witness, destroys your marriage, and walks away clean. Sophie takes the fall for everything. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger at the scope of Carter's manipulation, but also something like pity for Sophie. She thought she was trading up, leaving her blue-collar husband for a successful executive. She had no idea she was being set up as the fall guy. "So what's the plan?" I asked. Tessa's smile turned predatory. "We're going to give Carter exactly what he's planned for Sophie, but we're going to make sure he gets it instead." The first phase was information warfare. Tessa had contacts throughout the business community, clients, other real estate agents, people who moved in Carter's circles. By Tuesday afternoon, carefully selected pieces of information were circulating through the rumor mill. Carter Voss was having financial problems. Carter Voss was having an affair with a married employee. Carter Voss had been seen at expensive restaurants and hotels, entertaining someone who wasn't his girlfriend. The beauty of small-town gossip is that it grows in the telling. By Wednesday, the stories had evolved and multiplied. Carter wasn't just having an affair, he was having multiple affairs. He wasn't just spending company money, he was practically looting the corporate treasury. I spent Wednesday morning at the Anchor, nursing a coffee and listening to the locals dissect Carter's reputation. Frankie was behind the bar, polishing glasses and orchestrating the conversation like a conductor leading an orchestra. "Heard he bought that woman a car," said Pete from the gas station. "Heard it was a boat," added Maria from the grocery store. "Whatever it wasn't his money paying for it," concluded Mrs. Blanchard, who'd become the unofficial town authority on the Carter Voss scandal. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "People are staring at me at work. What did you do?" I didn't reply. Thursday brought phase 2 of our plan. Tessa had arranged for copies of Carter's financial documents to be delivered anonymously to 3 members of his company's board of directors. Not enough to trigger an immediate investigation, but enough to raise questions and concerns. Meanwhile, I paid a visit to Carter's house. He lived in a development on the outskirts of town, one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looked the same except for the color of the shutters. His BMW was in the driveway, which meant he was working from home, probably trying to avoid the gossip at his office. I parked across the street and called his number. "Carter, it's Ethan McAllister. We need to talk." There was a long pause. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Oh, it's a very good idea. In fact, I'd say it's essential. I'm sitting outside your house right now." Another pause, then, "I'll be right out." He emerged from his front door looking like he'd aged 5 years since Saturday night. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he was wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans, casual clothes that looked wrong on him, like a costume that didn't fit. He walked to my truck and climbed into the passenger seat, glancing nervously at his neighbor's windows. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want to understand something," I said. "The affair, I get that. These things happen, like you said. But the rest of it, the private investigator, the restraining order, the plan to frame me as abusive, that's something else entirely." His face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Just like you know about the embezzlement, the company funds you've been using to finance your new lifestyle." Carter's hands were shaking now. "You can't prove anything." "Can I?" I pulled out a folder, not the real evidence, just some random papers that looked official. Bank records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, corporate expense reports. Amazing what people notice when they start paying attention. "What do you want?" he repeated, but his voice was smaller now. "I want you to understand that you picked the wrong man to mess with. I'm not some stupid construction worker you can push around. I built this town, Carter. I know every family, every business owner, every person who matters, and they all know me." I leaned closer. "How's your reputation holding up this week? Getting many friendly phone calls? Business associates still returning your messages? Carter stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. This is harassment. No, this is consequences. You wanted to play games with people's lives? Welcome to the game. I started the truck. Get out. What? Get out of my truck. Walk back to your house. And Carter, tomorrow's going to be a very interesting day for you. He climbed out slowly, like an old man. As I drove away, I watched him in my rearview mirror, standing in his driveway, looking lost and small. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that matched my mood perfectly. Sophie had spent the night at her sister's house, claiming she needed space to think. What she really needed was somewhere to hide from the whispers and stares that followed her everywhere now. Tessa called at 8 a.m. It's done. The board meeting is at 10, and they have everything they need. How do you know? Because Miles Brennan called me an hour ago, asking if I had any information about Carter's alleged financial irregularities. Apparently, the board hired their own investigator yesterday. I felt a grim satisfaction. Carter's lawyer was already distancing himself from his client, never a good sign for the client. There's something else, Tessa continued. Sophie's been suspended from her job pending an investigation. They're looking into her access to the corporate accounts. So it was happening exactly as Carter had planned, except he was going down with the ship instead of watching from the shore. At 11 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Ethan, it's Carter. I need to see you, now. I'm busy. Please, I'll pay you. Whatever you want. Just name your price. There was panic in his voice, raw desperation. The board meeting must have gone even worse than we'd hoped. The anchor, I said. 1 hour. I arrived early and took a booth in the back, where we could talk privately. Frankie nodded from behind the bar, understanding without words that I needed space. Carter walked in looking like a broken man. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the defeat in his shoulders, the fear in his eyes. He slid into the booth across from me, his hand shaking as he reached for the beer I'd ordered for him. They fired me, he said without preamble. Effective immediately, security escorted me out of the building. That's rough, I said, not bothering to hide my lack of sympathy. The board thinks I embezzled nearly $200,000 over the past year. They're talking about criminal charges. Did you? He looked up at me with haunted eyes. Some of it, not all of it, but some of it. And the rest? The rest was Sophie. She had access to everything, knew all the passwords, handled most of the financial transactions, but they think it was all me. I took a sip of my beer, letting him stew in the silence. I can make this right, he said desperately. I can tell them it was Sophie, show them the evidence. The evidence you fabricated to frame her? He flinched. It wasn't fabricated. She really did have access. She really did make those transactions. On your orders, for your benefit, to pay for your affair. Carter buried his face in his hands. What do you want from me? I leaned back in the booth, studying this man who'd tried to destroy my life. A week ago, he'd been confident, arrogant, untouchable. Now, he was just another guy whose world had collapsed around him. I want you to disappear, I said finally. Leave town. Tonight. Don't contact Sophie. Don't try to salvage your reputation. Don't attempt to shift blame to anyone else. Just go. I can't. I have a house, a life here. Had, I corrected. Past tense. Your life here is over, Carter. The only question is whether you leave quietly or get dragged out in handcuffs. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating odds, looking for angles, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. If I leave, he said slowly, what happens to Sophie? That's between me and her. She loves me. I laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. Carter, she doesn't even know you. She fell in love with an image, a fantasy of success and sophistication. The real you, the guy sitting across from me right now, she's never met him. He finished his beer in one long swallow and stood up. You win. This wasn't about winning, I said. This was about consequences. He walked out of the Anchor without looking back, and I knew I'd never see him again. Men like Carter always have an exit strategy, some way to reinvent themselves in a new place with new people who don't know their history. But Sophie was a different story entirely. Sophie came home Sunday evening looking like she'd been through a war. Her sister's house had provided temporary shelter, but not from the reality of her situation. The whole town knew about the affair now, and her suspension from work had made the embezzlement scandal public knowledge. She found me in the kitchen, making dinner for one. Carter's gone, she said without preamble. I heard. Did you know he was going to abandon me? I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, but there was something hollow in her eyes now, something broken that couldn't be fixed with makeup or expensive clothes. Sophie, he was never planning to take you with him. You were always going to be the scapegoat. She sat down heavily at our kitchen table. I don't understand. I pulled out the folder Tessa had given me, the one containing all of Carter's real plans. He was setting you up from the beginning. The affair was just part of it. He needed someone with access to the company's financial systems, someone who could be blamed when the embezzlement came to light. She read through the document slowly, her face growing paler with each page. When she finished, she looked up at me with something like horror in her eyes. He was going to let me go to prison. Worse than that. He was going to make sure you went to prison while he rode off into the sunset with the money and a new identity. Sophie started crying then. Not the manipulative tears I'd grown used to, but deep, soul-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere fundamental inside her. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I thought I was trading up, you know? I thought he represented everything I wanted. Success, sophistication, a better life. And what did I represent? She looked at me through her tears. Everything I thought I was settling for. The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. After 15 years of marriage, she'd seen me as something to be endured, not cherished, a stepping stone to something better. The thing is, Sophie, I would have given you a divorce if you'd just asked. We could have split everything fairly, stayed friends, maybe even stayed in the same town. But you chose to lie, to cheat, to try to destroy me in the process. I know, and I'm sorry, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. No, I said quietly. You won't. She looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, this is over. All of it. The marriage, the pretending, the trying to fix something that was never right to begin with. I handed her a manila envelope. Divorce papers. I had them drawn up yesterday. You can keep the house. I never liked it anyway. You can keep the savings account, the car, whatever you want. I just want out. Sophie stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. But what about us? What about 15 years of marriage? What about them? Sophie, we've been strangers living in the same house for years. The only difference now is that we're both admitting it. She was quiet for a long time, reading through the divorce agreement. It was generous, more generous than she deserved, probably, but I didn't want anything that would remind me of this chapter of my life. Where will you go? She asked finally. I bought a place up the coast. Small cottage, needs work, but it's got a good foundation. I'm going to fix it up, maybe start my own contracting business. Alone? I thought about Tessa, about the conversations we'd had over the past week, about the way she'd looked at me when she said goodbye after Carter left town. There might be something there, or there might not. Either way, it wasn't Sophie's concern anymore. Maybe not alone, I said, but definitely without you. She signed the papers that night, her signature shaky but legal. By Monday morning, she'd packed her things and moved in with her sister permanently. The house felt empty, but not lonely. There's a difference between being alone and being abandoned. Tuesday morning, I got a call from Miles Brennan, Carter's former lawyer. Mr. McAllister, I represent the board of directors of Carter Voss's former company. They'd like to meet with you. About what? About your potential testimony in their case against Mr. Voss and your ex-wife. I met with the board that afternoon in their conference room overlooking the harbor. 5 serious people in expensive suits, looking like they'd stepped out of a corporate thriller. Mr. McAllister, said the chairman, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Wells, we understand you have information relevant to our investigation. I did. I had Tessa's evidence, my own observations, and a clear picture of how Carter had manipulated both the company's finances and my wife. But I also had something else, a chance to make a choice about what kind of man I wanted to be going forward. Mrs. Wells, I said, I think you have enough evidence to pursue charges against Carter Voss. As for my wife, ex-wife, I think she was as much a victim as anyone else. The board members exchanged glances. Are you saying you don't believe she was involved in the embezzlement? I'm saying she was a tool, not a mastermind. Carter used her access and her desperation to cover his own tracks. She made terrible choices, but she didn't deserve to be set up for someone else's crimes. In the end, the board agreed to focus their prosecution efforts on Carter, who'd already disappeared anyway. Sophie would face some civil penalties and would never work in corporate finance again, but she wouldn't go to prison for crimes that were fundamentally Carter's idea. It wasn't justice, exactly, but it was something like mercy. Wednesday morning, I loaded my truck with tools and personal belongings and drove up the coast to my new home. The cottage was small and weathered, perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. It needed a new roof, new windows, and about 6 months of steady work to make it livable. Perfect. As I unloaded my truck, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Tessa climbed out, carrying a thermos of coffee and a bag of sandwiches. Thought you might need some help, she said. I thought you were moving to Portland. I was, but I changed my mind. Turns out I like small towns after all, especially when they're full of honest people. We spent the day working on the cottage, stripping old paint and planning renovations. As the sun set over the ocean, we sat on the front porch, sharing a beer and watching the waves crash against the rocks below. Do you think they'll be okay? Tessa asked. Sophie and Carter? I thought about it for a moment. Carter will reinvent himself somewhere else. He's good at that. Sophie will figure out who she really is now that she's not trying to be someone else. And us? I looked at this woman who'd helped me reclaim my life, who'd stood up to a man who'd hurt us both, who'd chosen honesty over comfort and truth over convenience. I think we'll be just fine, I said. The cottage still needed work. The town would still gossip about the scandal for months to come. Sophie would still have to rebuild her life from scratch, and Carter would still be looking over his shoulder wherever he ended up. But as the stars came out over the Atlantic and Tessa's hand found mine in the darkness, I knew that some endings are really beginnings. Some foundations, once cleared of rot and deception, can support something stronger and more honest than what came before. The last toast had been drunk. The real celebration was just beginning.